The Lexus RX has come a long way since the late 90s, and this now is the 4th generation, exclusively sold in Ireland as a plug-in hybrid. Before we talk about the hybrid system, we should have a look at the new design. Lexus has rethought its spindle grille for the RX. It's still the basic shape, but it's much more enclosed than before, and it's smoother too. It's flanked by these high-tech LED headlights, and depending which trim grade you go for, you get different versions. The side profile of the Lexus RX is also quite distinctive, mostly because of the design detail and the shape of the window at the back here is really unusual. This is quite a sloping rear, and Lexus has been able to do that partially because there is no longer going to be a long version with 7 seats. I really like the rear of the RX. It's got a really trendy full-width taillight, of course, but within that is some interesting detailing. At the side here it carries the spindle design from the grille, for example. And now Lexus puts its name across the back as a word mark instead of the badge. I think it adds to the premium look. Despite the slope of this window, it's quite a practical car inside. Underneath the luggage cover it holds 461 litres, which is pretty decent. And under the floor itself there's some extra little bits of storage and even a toolkit, I noticed. The rear seat backs split 40-20-40 and you fold them down at the touch of a button. They form quite a flat floor, which is really useful. The first thing you notice getting into the back is how wide opening the rear doors are. These openings are definitely made for adults to get in here. And inside there's definitely loads of room for adults, especially in the outer 2 seats. And while cars like this rarely carry 5, the middle seat isn't too bad. Sure, the base is quite firm and not as sculpted as the outer seats, but it's fairly wide. And the floor, while it isn't completely flat, has a nice big flat section in the middle, so it's not exactly drawing the short straw. In terms of practicalities, there are pockets in the backs of the seats, pretty good door pockets here as well, and if you're not using the centre seat, you can pull this down. There's extra storage here and a couple of cup holders. In the middle there are air vents. This is a luxury car after all, and rear seat occupants can adjust the temperature for themselves as well. Finally, there are 2 USB-C ports back here for charging up your devices. Something I noticed sitting in the back here is that this glass roof brings a lot of light into the back. It makes the whole cabin feel airy and the rear isn't at all dark. Something you start to get an appreciation of in the back, and it really comes through in the front, is the quality. And Lexus is renowned for this. Its interiors for a long time have been really beautifully put together. Where the RX differs, it has now an extra dose of style, and some of the materials used are particularly tactile. But on top of that, you have this lovely sweep of this dashboard. So this leather panel in the door here goes in behind the dashboard, or in behind the instruments I should say, and comes out behind and sweeps all the way across the other side, and it really ties the whole interior together. The fact that it's got a stitch on top of it as well just adds to the premium feel. The next major upgrade for the RX over its predecessors is its infotainment, and now there's a massive touchscreen in the middle. It's very clear, very easy to use, and it's full of features, connectivity, functionality. Personally, I really like that it has wireless Apple CarPlay, and that's what I use a lot of the time, but the built-in system is actually very good. There are some climate control switchgear on it. However, I'm really happy to see that Lexus is sticking with some physical controls for that too. So you have these dials here to adjust the temperature, and actually there's also a volume knob in the middle here, another few bits and pieces, another few buttons, which is really good when you're on the move in particular. Complementing the big touchscreen is a lovely set of digital instruments. There's a little bit of customization in them. It's quite subtle depending which driving mode you're in, but overall they're very clear, easy to read, and full of the information that you need actually. The steering wheel itself is quite a simple round item. It's not too thick, it's just right. It feels good to hold actually. And while there are loads of different buttons on the spokes here, they're easy to find your way around, and the system prompts you as well for pressing the right button at times. The steering wheel is also adjustable electrically, so up and down, and there's plenty of adjustment on it, and also in and out. That goes along with these electrically adjustable seats, of course, and they're adjustable every which way. On the subject, the leather, especially on the seats, is really soft, really nice, and these are ventilated seats as well, so helps keep you cool on a summer's day. In terms of practicality, again you have okay door bins here. The glove box is of an adequate size, but the centre console is perhaps where most of the storage is. We really like what Lexus does with its centre console here. You've got this double hinge, so the passenger or the driver can access this big deep bin in the middle. Ahead of that, 2 chunky cup holders, very useful. You have an extra storage space up front here where there are 2 USB-C ports, but under here there's a hidden wireless charger for phones and for other devices. And actually underneath there are another 2 USB ports, one type A, one type C, so it's very easy to keep all your devices charged up. I mentioned at the start that the RX is now exclusively sold as a plug-in hybrid in Ireland, and it's the first plug-in hybrid RX actually. That means it starts off on electric power whenever possible, and officially the battery range of this car is 65 kilometers. Encouragingly, after full charge last night, I started off this morning and it was showing a range of 62 kilometers. So in the good conditions, good weather we're having at the moment, it seems that expectations can be as high or almost as high as the official numbers. That's really good. And that's usefully more than the 50 kilometers range that a lot of plug-in hybrids seem to come with these days. Naturally, it's very quiet, very refined when it's running on electric power. In fact, I don't even have to raise my voice here, even though I'm on quite rough road surfaces to talk to you. And it doesn't only like that when it's on electric power. Even when the engine cuts in, it is still a very refined and quiet car. Isolating you from the outside world, I noticed there's double glazed side windows. That makes a big difference. It reduces wind noise on the motorway in particular, and even in the wet, for instance, it really quietens everything down. And this is an exceptionally quiet car. Fans of the previous RX may miss the V6 petrol engine that used to be used, and you know that while it had a bit of character, it was a silky smooth engine. It was really quite nice to drive. The new engine in this, it's a 4-cylinder 2.5 litre petrol unit, and no, it's not as interesting perhaps as a V6, but it is just as quiet. You never hear it really unless you absolutely put your foot down and it's in sport mode, and then thankfully it doesn't sound coarse, it just sounds sporty really, surprisingly. But that isn't really what the RX is about, as ever. The RX is a luxury car first and foremost, and Lexus never intends for it to be seen as a sporty SUV in any way, unlike a lot of its German rivals perhaps. As with seemingly all modern cars, the RX has plenty of driving modes and settings. There's eco, comfort, sport, and then there's a custom setting where you can alter the modes yourself. But really, after spending a bit of time with it, it feels like a car you just leave in its default mode all the time. It just does everything smoothly, quietly, and it's just refined. I'll use that word again. I'll keep coming back to it, I know. It's a comfortable car, and yet that doesn't mean that there's no body control. It doesn't wallow around on these country roads that we're on at the moment. So you feel you know what's going on underneath the tyres, and the body is well controlled as you brake and as you accelerate, as you turn through roundabouts, etc. It feels controlled, and more so than its predecessor, I would say. But it is definitely a car that's been tuned for comfort first and foremost, and that's a very good thing. That fits in with the whole feeling of quality that pervades this interior. If you want to preserve your battery power for use later on in town or whatever, there are buttons down there to allow you to hold the charge and to run in hybrid mode. And even when you do, the car is very quiet and very refined. And it's worth pointing out that when it's all working together, there's up to 309 horsepower available. So this is no slouch whatsoever. Indeed, helping the petrol engine up front are two electric motors. There's one at the front axle, one at the rear. So it is a four-wheel drive car as well. I don't think many owners are going to expect this to be an off-roader in any way. It's just useful to have that extra traction. And you can feel it in the corners when you're pushing on a little bit more, that it gives the car better balance. Of course, four-wheel drive is also useful if you're towing, and this RX is rated to tow up to 2,000 kilograms of a braked load, which is pretty useful. Other than the driving modes I mentioned a minute ago, the transmission can be put into a sport setting, and the shifter itself is very solid. It does move in an unusual way perhaps, but you soon get used to that, but it's very solid, of very high quality. We put it into sport mode, there's a quicker response, and it's probably useful for overtaking, etc. But I must admit, I spent a good bit of time in this car, and it just feels like you leave it in its default settings all the time, and that's where it's at its best. As you can probably tell, we found the RX very satisfying to drive, and I imagine it'll be very satisfying to own as well. Lexus and the RX may not be the default option for SUV buyers in Ireland, but there's no doubt that this car should be on buyers' shortlists. If you want to find out more about the Lexus RX, or indeed all of its rivals, go along to our website. It's CompleteCar.ie, and it's a great resource for finding your next new car.